Welcome to Zero Knowledge. I'm your host, Anna Rose. In this podcast, we will be exploring the latest in zero-knowledge research and the decentralized web, as well as new paradigms that promise to change the way we interact and transact online. This week, Nico and I do a recap of the past year in ZK events that my team and I have hosted or have produced, specifically covering ZK Summit 11 and the more recent ZK Summit 12. We chat about the talks and themes that stood out, share a bit about how these events are produced and how the program is created. We also end the podcast discussing and summarizing some of the most exciting panels, and specifically the meta themes this year that got us talking. I just want to do a quick shout out to the ZK Summit production team, since I didn't get a chance to mention them in the episode. So a big thank you for working with me and producing these amazing events. Thank you, Agni, Rachel, Natalia, Hanya, and Henrik. This is the crew working behind the scenes to make these events as amazing as they are and as memorable as they are. So thanks to you guys. I also want to say a thank you to the sponsors who came on board for ZK 11, ZK 12, and this podcast for the year. I mean, this is where the revenue for the show comes from, and I really appreciate you guys supporting us. So as some of you know, after this episode, I will be taking a break from the show. And so this will be our last weekly episode until the end of the year. My teams over at ZK Podcast, as well as the team over at ZK Hack and I, produced 4 major events this year, 2 ZK Summits and 2 ZK Hacks, along with many other events, content, the ZK Whiteboard Sessions, as well as this show. I'm also working on another business in the form of zkV. Yes, it's a lot. And so I need a bit of time to reset. I might be recording 1 or 2 episodes over the next few months, but I wanted to take a break from this weekly cadence. That said, there's a lot of action going on around it. For example, the ZK Whiteboard Sessions. A little plug for ZK Whiteboard Sessions. This is a video content series where hosts Tracy and Nico go over the details of specific ZK systems, optimizations, as well as architectures. These whiteboard sessions are supported by the ZK Grants Round, which was co-funded by the Ethereum Foundation, Aztec, Polygon, Scroll, Tyco, and ZK Sync. So it's been really cool to get to produce that. And I do think of the ZK Whiteboard Sessions as a bit of a replacement to this show, because it will be airing every 2 weeks over the next 3 months while we're taking a break. So don't forget to check that out. Now, before we kick off with this episode, I did want to point you towards the ZK Jobs Board. There you can find job opportunities to work with top teams in ZK. I also want to encourage teams looking for top talent to post your jobs there as well. We've been hearing from more and more teams that have used this jobs board that they found excellent talent through it. So be sure to check out the ZK Jobs Board. We've added the link in the show notes. Now, Tanya will share a little bit about this week's sponsors.
Today's episode is sponsored by O1 Labs. Have you heard of O1 Labs? They've been pioneers in zero knowledge since its early days, driving the programmable cryptography revolution with projects like Mina Protocol, the first ZK-powered blockchain live since 2021. Mina's decentralized platform is creating the foundation for a new internet, built on privacy and trust. From O1JS, their SDK for simplifying ZK development, to O1VM pushing the limits of zkVMs, O1 Labs is working directly with the community to build tools that unlock new possibilities. O1 Labs envisions an internet where developers use programmable cryptography to create more powerful applications. And that internet needs Mina. Visit o1labs.org and join them as they shape the future for the ZK-powered internet. So thanks again, O1 Labs. Today's episode is sponsored by Aleo. A new era of decentralized, privacy-preserving computing is here. Aleo, a Layer 1 blockchain powered by zero-knowledge cryptography, recently announced their mainnet launch. Now developers can build applications that take advantage of Aleo's unique combination of permissionlessness, programmability, and privacy. Start by learning their domain-specific programming language, Leo. Write and deploy your first ZK application at leo-lang.org. Or head on over to aleo.org to learn more about their technology and what you can build. Aleo, this is zero knowledge without compromises. So thanks again, Aleo. And now, here's our episode.
So I'm here today with Nico. We've just wrapped up the ZK Summit 12 week here in Lisbon. Hey, Nico.
Hey, Anna. Nice to be here.
When we started prepping this, we were like, let's just do ZK 12 in review. But actually, as we sat down to do this interview, I realized that I had never done a review of ZK11 in Athens. And actually, you and I have crossed paths on a bunch of projects this year. So I thought we could do a little bit of like mapping of the year in terms of events and some of the special productions that we did.
Yeah, 100%.
So yeah, let's start there. Going back to the beginning of the year, I was wearing a different hat, the ZK Hack hat, and we were doing ZK Hack online. We did the live ZK Hack jargon decoder session.
Oh, yes. Yeah. That was chaotic, to say the least.
Chaotic.
Yeah.
We learned a few things about, moderating and interviewing and answering questions. I think for the listeners of this show, we actually re-recorded that session, which was in a little bit more of like a organized way, which became the ZK Jargon Decoder episode, which is actually an episode with a video. I'm going to link to that.
Is it the only video episode?
Yeah,
Nice.
pretty much. Or except I think ZK10 at the ZK Summit
we did a
10.
panel live.
Exactly. Yeah, we did the live panel. And that is also a video. But yeah, usually the show isn't. Next on the list, I think we said was ZK Summit 11.
Which you often refer to as the best ZK Summit.
I mean, ZK12 was epic, but ZK11 was more so, I think. It's like, for me, there was just something, everything came together kind of perfectly, I think, for ZK11. The time of year, the city, like who was available, what other people were ready to do. Because like basically when we did ZK Summit 11, we had the one-day event that we hosted, and then Ingo Nyama put together ZK Accelerate the next day.
Yeah.
And then there were side events. So it just meant for like, it really was like 2 solid events in our week. I think also a lot of people had never been to Athens. A lot of the people that we know in Athens were so excited because they hadn't had very many events hosted in Athens. And so there was this sort of first time, and like everyone was very, very pumped.
Yeah, there's a surprisingly big like Greek community in crypto and cryptography in general.
Yeah, nice. I want to come back to ZK11 and kind of do a little bit of a deep dive into like what it was like, but I'll keep going with our year. So I went on after that with the ZK Hack team to produce ZK Hack Krakow, which you were not at. That was the one event.
That's the one event I missed, yeah.
Oh, and Brussels. You weren't at ECC.
Was that you putting it on?
No, but we did things. Like there was a ZK Hack meetup. There was like events that I was part of in Brussels.
Right.
The next time that we saw each other was at ZK Hack Montreal, where you were a judge.
Yeah.
So you got to hang out for that one. And then Web3 Summit, where you gave a talk. And actually, I don't know if we've ever talked about this on the show. So I programmed an afternoon at the Web3 Summit, and it was myself, you, and Jim, and then Jim Posen from Irreducible. And then we did a panel. Originally, there had actually been like 5 or 6 people who were supposed to be on that block. And then it just kept, we kept getting cancellations, so that it was just the 3 of us. But I thought it was really cool, like a little snapshot.
That was, I think, my favorite panel I've ever been on. I think we covered a lot, and we, unearthed a lot of things which were, I think, good to hear for people.
Cool. Yeah, we'll try to dig some of these videos up also for folks. Like, I don't know if they would have caught that one, so I'll add it to the show notes. Around this time, I think, was it then that we started recording the whiteboard sessions? Yeah,
actually, even around ZK Hack Montreal.
Oh, yes, true. So yeah, this summer, and now we actually have the first module out, but this summer we started putting together this new season of the ZK Whiteboard Sessions. So maybe just some backstory for listeners. In 2022, we did season 1 of the ZK Whiteboard Sessions. They were inspired very much so by like the near whiteboard sessions. I want to do the shout out because we didn't invent this format at all. I mean, I don't know that they invented the format, but they had like pioneered the format in our space in a way. And we, together with Polygon, produced the first season. We did 16 modules. Dan Bonet did the first 3. At the time of recording this episode, I think we have about like 30,000 views on that first video, which is like for us in the ZK world, like quite a lot. It's kind of unusual. But I know that those first 3 modules and maybe like some of the whiteboard sessions after in season 1 have become like, it's where I send people if they're trying to get into ZK for the first time. I'm like, I think,
Same.
Yeah, if they're like, oh, I don't know what is this IOP? What are these words you're using? It's like, watch these 3 modules, watch them closely because after you watch them, a lot of what everybody's talking about is going to make sense. Yeah, and so this year, we were really excited that we got a grant from the Ethereum Foundation, but also like a bunch of ZK projects. They came together to do something called the ZK Grants Round, and they gave ZK Hack a grant to do the Whiteboard Sessions Season 2. And the learnings that we had from Season 1 was like we had done maybe too many.
Yeah.
It was a lot to produce. It's like a lot to do within a year. Also, when the hosts like have other jobs, like it's not their only job to
even
interview
going
people.
through the videos, because like ZK Hack Discord has these study groups, right?
Yeah.
And so we'd start with a cohort. Everyone would stay for the first few episodes. And around module, I don't know, 7, 8, people start dropping off like dramatically.
Totally.
And I don't think we ever finished the whole like series with a single like study group.
Yeah, exactly. So even the viewers, for them, it's a lot. So this season, we decided to instead do 6 modules with hopefully a 7th as a bonus. I'm going to leave it there because, yeah, I don't want to.
Mystery.
Yeah, I want to leave the mystery. But we have actually, as of now, recorded all 6 of our modules.
Yeah.
So we have them in the bag and we've been recording them. So yeah, you recorded David and Jim over at ZK Hack Montreal, like right around that event, not at the event, but like after the event. And then you recorded, you recorded with Jim in Berlin, eh?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Wait, who did we record in Montreal?
Just David.
Just David? Oh, cool.
And there was New York with Justin Taylor.
Oh, yes.
And Uma Roy, I think.
Yeah, but those are with host Tracy,
yes,
who our audience hasn't seen yet because we haven't released any of those episodes yet. But, actually, I think this show comes out the day before the second module should come out. So yes, if anyone's listening now, keep your eyes out over on the ZK Hack channels for all that. Maybe just a plug, we will be doing another study group. We do these where we just kind of get together virtually on the ZK Hack Discord, and we kind of go week by week. We'll go through like some sort of content. In this case, we'll be watching the ZK Whiteboard Session videos and then getting together to discuss them and try to like analyze them, ask questions, figure out like if there's any, unclear things in the videos, like how we can clarify that as a group. And this is what Nico was just mentioning with the cohorts. We've done 4 of them for the ZK Whiteboard Session Season 1, but now this year we're going to do it for the first time for Season 2. And I think people who want to participate should have watched maybe the first few modules of Season 1, but they don't have to have done it. Like they don't have to have done those study groups.
But you need a bit of a basis of like what's a proof system, and yeah, there's a few of these initial concepts that are covered in the Dan Bonnet videos that are going to be necessary for Season 2.
We'll add a link to that as well in the show notes. But continuing on with our year of events, after Berlin, so I guess is our next event ZK12?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, cool. And that's what we're going to be spending a lot of time on in this episode. But before we do that, I want to now talk about ZK11, the ZK Summit that for me remains the pinnacle of a ZK Summit. I mentioned, just in this intro that like one of the reasons was that we had these 2 events side by side, that people were new to the city. But I want to ask you, like, what do you remember about ZK11? And was it also your favorite? Maybe it wasn't. I don't know.
Actually, it's a tough one. I think in terms of location, my favorite. It was so nice to be in Athens, and especially because I am quite close with a lot of Greek people in this community, so it was great to be there with them. The content was amazing. The venue, I loved the venue, and I know you loved
I loved it.
Yeah. What was it? Oh, it was a planetarium. But I found that there weren't many spaces where people could gather and chat. I don't know. I found that space quite confusing. But then again, the stage was so fun, like having those sort of like a UN, like little microphone situation was really funny. But content-wise, I think it was huge because we had Stir Premiere. We had Circle Stark as well, like very early on. A lot of these like attested data things. So we had ZK Email present, even though they had presented before. There was also like OpenID Connect, which is Aptos's version of ZK Login, which uses like similar principles.
There were a ton of ID solutions presented, actually. There was like 2 passport projects. It was sort of the theme of that summit, I think.
So that is actually what inspired me to then do a talk about these at the Web3 Summit thing in Berlin that you were hosting.
Oh, cool.
Like that is why I ended up talking about this. And actually ZK11, I got to present Archie, which is this work about contact discovery that I have mentioned I think the first time it was on the show, like...
Whoa. What was that? ZK9.
ZK9,
yeah,
absolutely.
It was after ZK9.
Yeah. And this is work with Kobe Gherkin, who's a co-host, and Filip Jovanovic, who's at ZKV with you. So
I'm a co-founder of mine, yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
So yeah, overall, like super fun for me. What did you think?
Well, no, now I want to ask you though, like, was it your favorite? Because you were like, So think through the summits you've been to.
Yeah.
Because I've heard some people have said to me, like, ZK7 remains their favorite. I don't know if you were at it. Were you there?
That was my first ZK Summit. Yeah.
Okay.
And so it does feel special as well in that sense of like, wow, first time seeing all this crowd, like being impressed by all these people. The venue had this like, I don't know, it was on multiple levels and there was this amazing like glass box essentially, which was the main stage.
Yeah.
Looked super impressive. And I just remember sitting there and drinking it all in of like, oh my God, there's so much to learn.
That was held at it was a museum in Amsterdam that had this, like the main stage just had this almost like atrium-like feel, like a glass ceiling. I don't think it actually had a glass. Oh, maybe did it have a glass?
I don't know. I don't know.
The light in there was very special for sure. And it was on the water, on a canal, classic Amsterdam. And it had a courtyard that was full of flowers because it was like tulip season in Amsterdam. And there was something quite magical about ZK7.
Yeah.
But going back to ZK11, you mentioned it was in a planetarium. For me, that was so cool. Like, we actually got to see a planetarium show at the end. We bought all the tickets to this planetarium and gave it out to people. And we picked the show. I mean, the show we picked, did you go to it?
Yeah, I did.
It was
a bit
slightly
trippy.
dorky.
Yeah.
It's tricky because we had people in the audience who were like, really into like true cosmology or whatever you call it. Like they're actually into, that was so wrong. That's not the word. They're into astronomy. But anyway, they're like actually, they know about this stuff and they, this was made maybe for like an audience of 10-year-olds. So it wasn't necessarily the highest quality planetarium show, but the people actually who ran it were wonderful. I remember the food not looking that special, but tasting amazing. That was like a funny quirk of the event. The talks that I remember are also the stir work, which was like, for me, I mean, I know that there had been work on the original fry with like deep fry and then deep Ali. I think those were the variations.
Yeah, deep fry.
But then it had sort of gone quiet, that line of work, until stir, as far as I could tell. Like that seemed to be like the revamp, like we're going to actually tackle this part of the stack.
Yeah. I mean, you had the like breakdown and base folds.
Okay.
Which are also like hash-based polynomial commitment schemes. But yeah, there hasn't been in the univariate land like a big jump forward until stir.
I also would highlight your talk on Archie. I would also highlight Jim Posen's talk. I think that was when Binius was presented at the summit. I don't think we had it at the previous one, so it was great to see that. And I didn't actually get to see this live, but saw it later on the videos. I really liked Alex Evans's talk.
Yeah, I didn't get to see it either, actually. I need to go back and watch it.
I think we had a panel right then. I think that was the end of the day. He didn't, like his spot was kind of tricky. It was like near the end of the day, and we actually had to go back on stage. But I really liked that too. Yeah. And then I just remember the workshops for the ID stuff being packed. I think the venue was a little actually too small for us in that case. Like you talk about not being able to find those spots. Yeah. I think part of it was very, very full.
Actually, talking about ID and all these demos, I just want to make a shout out to the Raramo team.
Yeah.
Because they recently had Georgian members of parliament using their app to scan passports and set up like votes.
That's wild.
Yeah, this is huge. Excited to see where this goes. So yeah, shout out to them.
Nice. All right. I think that basically is the recap of ZK11. So now we can move on to the recap of the more recent ZK Summit 12. It was held in Lisbon, October 8th, just a few days ago now.
Yeah.
For me, it was the fourth major event that I hosted with the team. We had produced 4 pretty major for us, like not like 1,000-person events, but like each of them being like 100, 200 to 500-person events. It was quite a lot. And coming back kind of to wrap up the year for me, at least on the event front with a summit is wonderful because we kind of just like love producing them now because we know the cadence. We know what we're doing. We have a lot of the planning and stuff already. It's like baked in to what we do. The way it starts is I usually make an announcement for speaker applications and attendee applications. So this year, the way that we did it was if you had applied early, you could choose if you wanted to give a talk and you could submit the talk. You could also choose just to be an attendee. If you applied, though, you'd get access to the early bird tickets. Mm-hmm. In the past, I've done full application for the entire event, including all tickets, but it is actually a ton of work to scan. We're actually evaluating all of those folks. And this time around, honestly, the applications were so good. Most people got through. I think most of the people who applied would have been invited. Mm-hmm. And so we just decided to make it, you apply for the early bird, you get the good price. Yeah. You answer a few questions for us, like how would you explain random oracles to a friend question.
I love those questions.
Yeah. And we collect all the speaker applications in that period. And that's usually starting 3 months before the summit. And by the way, I'm saying this on the air because I'm going to encourage people who want to maybe participate in the next summit to listen to this episode. Because you're going to get some insights into how it works, mm-hmm. and that might help you, figure out your journey with the event.
One thing I noticed, a lot of people don't realize how early the deadline is to apply to talk.
Yeah.
And often people message me oh shit, I wanted to talk. How do I apply? I'm sorry, it closed a few weeks ago.
I know. So, I do say that a lot. We are very loud about it in the channels and on Twitter, but people do miss it. Usually, if you want to be safe, we usually release the application form 3 months before the event, and we usually close the talk submission about 6 weeks before the event. We do have a lot of people kind of afterwards, trying to get a talk in. And we have a short list. We'll kind of receive them, but it's the likelihood gets lower and lower that there's actually a spot.
Yeah. So how does one get a talk in, Anna?
Exactly. I kind of wanted to have that conversation because you and I are both on the programming team, not alone. But I thought we could share a few things about what we are looking for and maybe what we're not looking for. What are you usually looking for?
For me, so I tend to be excited more about technical stuff. Mm-hmm. And this is why it's good that, we have a panel of multiple people looking at this. The first thing I look for is does the title imply some technical novelty, be it mm-hmm. on the theory side or on building side? I've engineered things in a very smart way, and here's how I'm going to describe it. Or I figured out a new way to compute this, or a new polynomial equipment scheme. Yeah, I think that's my first criteria.
So I think we're often looking for fresh content. We're looking for a talk we've never heard of before. Mm-hmm. And as we narrow down the selection, we actually do go research if people have given that talk before.
Yeah.
We don't do it on every single submission. We have to get it to a manageable size. Just also maybe for context, for ZK11, I think we had 130 talk submissions. For ZK12, we had 110. We usually have about 35 to 40 spots. It's not a super low percentage that get accepted, but we have to say no to over half each time. And so this is where we have also had to say no to really good talks. And we've also debated some talks where it's this would be good, but we're comparing it and we only have this small group of talk spots available.
Yeah, and sometimes there are themes that come out, and you'll get for each summit, depending on the narrative at the time, many talks about the same theme.
Yeah.
And those end up competing against each other more than they would compete against the rest of the pool of submissions.
Totally. We do usually prefer more generalized talks too, things that speak to a topic or narrative or concept. And we're usually less interested in talks that purely are talking about someone's system.
Yeah.
There are some of those talks do get programmed, but they tend to be less popular, with all of the committee. Yeah. So that's maybe just a note for anyone who's thinking of applying, try to find a way to generalize what you're working on. Think of it more how is this a contribution to the ZK space, and a little bit less how is my particular choice and architecture the best?
Sometimes those talks are still super interesting. I remember Lurk at the ZK9 in Lisbon, and they were sort of the first ones to have designed it the tiniest zkVM, and that they would use Nova, and these were one of the first folding-based VMs that they were presenting. So in that case, they are presenting their architecture, but it's also something new. It's a new engineering approach. And that still feels exciting. But teams that come on to say, my Stark-based VM is better than your Stark-based VM because, I don't know, I coded it slightly differently, that's slightly less interesting. And again, there's a spectrum, right? If it's impressive GPU acceleration work or CPU acceleration work, back in. But yeah.
So we do 2 summits a year. There's only 35 or 40 slots, depending on the stages and sort of how we design it. But I try really hard not to have the same speakers speak at 2 in a row. And the reason for that is if you only have that number of speakers, but the community's actually gotten bigger, I want to have 70 to 80 slots for the year to give out to different people. And so this is why, and actually anyone who's applied twice in a row has probably gotten the message from us saying, hey, you just spoke at the last summit and therefore we want to prioritize some of the other speakers. That is a tricky one because sometimes those talks are awesome.
Yep.
And we're like, oh, it's so good. But we really don't want to, I think it's a fair rule. I think it's just it gives a lot more space to newcomers too. Mm-hmm. I think if we just had, speakers we know speak every single time, I don't know if it would be as dynamic.
Yeah. One thing that I've seen you do and that I thought was quite nice was to encourage these speakers who repeatedly apply with good talk to get someone else from their team to give the talk. Because that also gives, these other team members more exposure to the community and time to shine, some time on stage.
Totally. And then what has happened sometimes is I think if we've seen a project submit every time, but with very similar narratives, then at some point we'll also kind of encourage a break at least. It doesn't mean in future summits we wouldn't accept it. It's more just if we're every single summit hearing from a team talking about almost the same thing, then we would probably try to get at least a break in there. Obviously, it still has to be really interesting. But yeah, there's other nuances that are tricky to describe. Yeah. This is, I think, the first time we've ever talked at all about some of the criteria or rules or framing that we're thinking about. It is also it's a somewhat subjective process, programming a conference. Yeah. We do try our best to give space to newcomers to make sure there's not these repeat talks, but we're also always thinking what is this audience going to like? What is this audience into now? What kind of themes are they going to be most into? I mean, it's interesting. This past summit, we had 2 FHE talks, which I haven't actually seen them yet. So I don't know how they went, but because we haven't seen the videos from the other stages. But I knew kind of from other signals that there's interest in what's going on in that corner of advanced cryptography. It's not quite ZK, but there is a lot of overlap. And so, that's why this time around we had 2 talks that.
Actually, weren't both talks in the realms of proving that I computed something correctly in FHE or proving correct encryption?
Using ZK, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I
think so.
Close to the realm of proof systems.
Yeah. I think also if there wasn't a theme or a few themes of this particular summit, I mean, I don't know if it fully came through in the programming, partly because we also had a few people's, the initial curation, we pick the talks that we really like. We usually pick more than the 40 or 35 spots just to give that buffer in case people can't come or, if there's some reason that these talks get canceled at a later date. In this case, I was definitely excited about the ZK-TLS talks. At the same time, we actually had, unfortunately, a few of those not come through. They didn't get visas or they couldn't get over in time. So it was or they chose to go to DevCon. Right. No judgment. I totally understand. I think people had a really hard time this fall trying to figure out where to go. There's permissionless happening over in North America at the same time as Summit, and then Bangkok a few weeks later. So I get it. It was a competitive space this fall. But I thought that was definitely a narrative that for this summit I was excited about. That doesn't mean for the next one we will be, but it was just something that I picked up a bit. Was there anything that you noticed in the submissions this time?
Was verification layers a theme of ZK12 or ZK11? I get them a bit mixed up now. So I remember in one of those 2 summits, a lot of applications about verification layer.
Oh, yes. This one, that was definitely here. I think this was actually this past summit, ZK12. We got a bunch of talks that were all kind of similar, all focused just on that area. So that did seem to be an exciting category.
one thing I wanted to come back on with both ZK11 and ZK12 was this like physical NFC experiment.
Yeah. The Cursive team actually approached us for ZK11. They had been doing this I think they had done it at ETH Denver. They were doing things with NFC cards, NFC chips, and they were like, we could do something with your event. And I was like, I was so into that. I was so excited that it was almost like the minute they asked was the minute I realized I wish there had been experiments before. I'm like, we're building all this cool stuff and then we don't use any of it at the summit itself. And so they proposed it. And so for ZK11, what we did was just like they created an NFC card that we put in the lanyard pouch, and you could connect with people by tapping their phones with this card, and you can make these connections. And I think in ZK11, you could like generate a proof if you like met 5 people or more. You could generate a ZKP and then post it on Twitter. And for ZK11, we also it was actually a lot of work for the Cursive team. They had created individual cards for every single talk. Yeah. And so if you went to a talk, you could tap the talk and then record that you'd been there. And we added some description and stuff in it. It was really cool as a user experience, but really tough as for them. Yeah. I would say organizer, but really the people behind the activation. Also, we found not that many people participated in that part. So it was an experiment, it was like, okay, I think the meeting people worked, but the talks didn't work as well.
Just to add, they also had a really cool NPC thing going on where you could go up to someone and check who did we meet in common. And you could also check, I'm guessing, like which talks did we see in common.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
For ZK12, we brainstormed a few different ideas. They had done, I think in the time between the two events, they had done lots of other events and experiments. One had been around recruiting. Yeah. And we floated the idea for a minute, but ZK Summit isn't there is a recruiting component. We have a jobs board and a lot of sponsors put their jobs up there during the summit. It's part of the packages and everything. But it's not like a pure recruiting event. And it felt like it wasn't exactly the right environment for it.
Right.
Instead, we decided to continue with the leaderboard idea. So like the more people you tap, you could rank on a leaderboard. They used different tech under the hood this time too. Like instead of it just being like how many, which talks did you go to? Basically, you'd tap it, you'd get an account, you'd fill out your info, your socials, and then you'd choose which they had a list of different kinds of ZK tech, and we're like, which are most overrated?
Yeah.
You had 3 stars. A lot of people got confused, actually, because they were like, wait, is 3 good or bad? Like, is it a lot of stars means they're good things or bad things?
There was a little text, a description that explained how to use the ranking system, but I don't think anyone read it. They just saw stars and clicked it.
Oh, man.
And then again, you had this sort of NPC, like, private set intersection thing to see, like, do we agree on these hot takes or not? Without revealing which hot takes you disagree on.
I mean, what I love about what they're doing is they're playing with some of the most advanced libraries and stuff to do this. And I think this is an audience that very much appreciates it. Yeah. Something different this time around was we wanted to also encourage more of that engagement. Last time there's a leaderboard for how many like connections you made, but no one, like there was nothing to win. You just would be like top of the leaderboard. And like I got really competitive at ZK11 and like I think I won, but I won nothing. I got no prize.
Starting just before the final panel, running up to people and be like, I got to tap your thing.
Oh, I want to tap your thing. But for ZK12, another company of mine, ZKV, put together or like decided to kind of offer some prizes to encourage people to actually make these connections. And there was one person who immediately, like from the start, was like clearly very into this and was on the mission to win first place, and they did. Nice. Evo, shout out to Evo, who got the first place. In terms, I think he made like around 80 connections or something. Wow. I don't know how genuine these all were, but yeah. Something else that was cool this time is they had these rings that you could win. And that is like, that's going to be so cool to see what they do with it. So basically there's a chip in the ring. And so then you could put your socials. You can like basically do very easy contacts. If someone wants to get in touch with you, they can just tap on your ring. But I think they want to do some cool stuff with that as well. I'm really, really excited to see what that team is up to.
Same. Actually, their talk was also very insightful, I found.
Yeah. I want to just continue with one extra point about the sort of interactive part of the summit. So something else that we tried out this year was like in my intro, I presented this map of ZK, which is what do you call these? Like industry maps where you just have like different categories and then you show different companies in the categories.
I guess.
And this is the second time or third time, actually, I'm showing this map on a stage. It's changed every time. And that was kind of the message I wanted to share, was that like when you make a map like that, it's always slightly out of date because you probably don't know in that moment that like the status of every single company on that map, and they may have changed since you did research on them. We were trying to kind of crowdsource this map from the audience during the event. ZKV put together this magnetic poster where it had these different quadrants and different categories. And then we also had these magnets with the company logos on them, and people could place them in the category that they thought they fit in. And what we learned from that was like, I mean, we did have some teams that we thought were in some category, but learned through this we're actually moving towards another category. We learned about new projects because people could actually come and like write a new team onto one of these magnets. And so we learned about a bunch of new ones. We learned that some of these projects are really unknown in our ecosystem because people didn't know where to put them. There's others that were very well known in our ecosystem and would move around a lot. And I think the ZKV team has taken photos and stuff of the different boards.
Oh, nice. So throughout the day?
Exactly. And like how it changed. So I hope to get a chance in the next few weeks to see, what that looked like. In general, I kind of want to do a call out for future summits too, like people who are working on experiments like the two that we just mentioned, like the NFC cards or a map of ZK or something like that. They should get in touch with us kind of early in the process to see if we could incorporate it. Because I'd love to have more ZK stuff that people can actually touch and do something with at the summit. This is the perfect place to do stuff like this.
I guess even if as a sponsor you have a booth, like that's also, you have a nice space to do stuff like that.
For sure. Yeah, I would encourage the sponsors for next events to also see if they could be inspired by some of this stuff. It's really cool. I think what we should talk about now is a little bit of the content.
Yeah.
What is the core? What's the point of ZK Summit? It's really to get together to watch and learn about some of the newest, most cutting edge ZK research or techniques or proving systems or applications. So this time around, I mean, Nico, neither you or I have had a chance to really see all of the talks.
No.
So we're only going to be able to really talk about the things that we got a chance to see.
Yeah.
All the talks for the summit will be coming out actually around the time of this airing and in the next few weeks. So, I might highlight some more on Twitter as I get to see them. But yeah, let's jump into what we did see and what you would highlight as talks you liked or themes you liked or Yeah,
so this is absolutely not like an exhaustive list because I was mostly main stage during the day.
True, you were hosting.
Yeah, that was super fun actually. But yeah, the things I wanted, or when I was taking notes about like, how did I feel about ZK Summit? The themes that came up were like the war talk, the cursive talk. There seems to be like a resurgence of hash-based versus elliptic curve. Like this debate is still ongoing with interesting inputs. And then you mentioned the FHE sessions. And at the end, the panel also like, I don't know, there are a few interesting signals in there for me.
Cool. Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I would also highlight the Word talk. I think I'm saying that right. It's spelled WHIR for the listeners. It rhymes with stir, I was told. So I think we are saying it right. And I had a lot of fun on the panel. So I also had a chance to see, we had 2 IVC talks folding. And I'm trying to remember if we actually covered it that much in previous summits. I'm not sure that we did.
Well, actually, I presented Sangria at ZK9 in Lisbon. Yeah.
True. Oh, you're right. Okay, so it had been on the stage before.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got to see, and we also had Jens Grad speak, which having him join this summit was fun.
Yeah, that I have in the hash-based versus elliptic curve, actually. Like it's part of that theme. I have the IVC talk and Ariel's talk about like this repeated computation with global state. They fall into that theme for me, which we can, zoom into at any point.
Yeah, why don't we?
Yeah, so hash-based proof, we obviously had Were on stage premiering, very impressive, and we can have a whole other little discussion on Were. There's also, at the same time, a lot of papers that just came out on ePrint, one called Blaze, one called Deepfold, and these are all like new polynomial commitment schemes in Hashland that seem to all be super fast.
Okay.
And at the same time, you have Aztec, who actually had 2 talks at the summit being like, we're doing IVC, we need elliptic curves. It's ride or die, with elliptic curves.
Yeah.
So you have also Nexus and Jens Groth talking about memory checking and IVC. And so they're also using these additively homomorphic commitments, which you get from elliptic curve. So it seems like the debate is not completely over, and that there's a new chapter opening up. I should also mention there's Srinath Sethi has another 2 works on folding that just came out, like Nebula and Neutron Nova.
Neutron Nova?
Yeah. The naming is beautiful.
The cosmos all over again.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So yeah, there's a whole new chapter ready to be opened. And a few like interesting spanners in the works. Like one thing which I thought was super insightful, not one of your events, but at SBC, Ali Ben-Sasson was presenting sort of the stew prover, the state of the stew prover. And he had this pie chart detailing where the prover spends time. And at the end of the day, fry in total accounts for maybe 10%.
Okay.
So replacing fry with something faster like stir, whir, blaze, anything else might not give you that much of an improvement boost. And so this new research in hash-based commitment schemes is super interesting, but I don't know if it's going to translate to crazy performance improvements.
Interesting. So you feel like it in its snapshot today could only be like improvements would be sort of minimal, even as we do more research to try to make them faster.
So again, referring to that same Ali Ben-Sasson talk, I think he says we can do it best like 5 times better. And maybe I'm exaggerating. It's somewhere between 2 and 5 from his like pie chart. Whereas maybe elliptic curves have a lot more room for like improvement. I don't know.
Oh, I like that idea.
Yeah. And then the other spanner that I want to throw into this whole debate is delegation, right? Like we have these collaborative snarks. So we have this model where I can like split my data in a way that, as long as these nodes don't collude, it stays secret and they can do that snark for me.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that as like a bit of a, like, so this goes back to this like small fields type work, this like hash-based where Binius and I think Plonky and a lot of the Plonky 3, a lot of these new proving systems live. And then you have the pairing-based, which is Plonk, and like everything around folding and everything around lookup arguments. Well, maybe not everything, but a lot around lookup arguments is like focused on optimizing on that side. I had this interview recently with Zach and Ariel, and we talked about like the battle. And like Ariel had actually previously been like slightly depressed because he was like, I feel like everyone's leaving pairing-based stuff.
Yeah.
But when we had the interview, it sounded like he was a bit happier again. Like, actually, there's ways that this is still very relevant and we're like doing cool stuff. Because of the, like this collaborative snarks, because its output could be used on these like server side, as I understand it, but its input could be from these client side. Is this true? Where it's like you could sort of then use the pairing-based stuff?
The nice thing about collaborative snarks is either like each individual in a group doesn't have the full secret to produce a snark, but together we can produce it. Or I have my whole secret, but I don't have the power to compute the snark. So I'm going to split it up, give it to a few people, and they can collaboratively do the snark on my behalf. Whether it's pairing or hash-based doesn't really matter.
Okay.
The thing here is it gives you this power to delegate in a way that's potentially privacy preserving.
Would that then mean though, like if you could do it with hash-based, then it's more like you start to add the privacy into the hash-based ones, whereas like previously we just thought, oh, well, if it's being proven server side, there's like you lose all privacy.
Yeah.
Because you're always going to have to send what you need proven to a prover somewhere else who's working on very optimized hardware.
Correct, yeah. There are different flavors of privacy there, depending on what like trust assumptions you make. But I think private delegation is going to be an interesting chapter to open.
Interesting. But does collaborative snarks not help the pairing-based argument? Where does pairing-based still
yes.
I mean, I guess what you were saying is like pairing-based has more optimizations to go, so it might be competitive. But like, have any other like...
Yeah, I didn't really explain why I was saying delegation is playing a part in this debate. And the reason... So Aztec, we're doubling down on elliptic curves because they say they need very small proofs because they have this peer-to-peer network and these proofs are going to be roaming around the peer-to-peer network. And you need them to happen client-side in a low-memory environment. So either a browser or a mobile browser. And so they're saying we can't have these large FFTs that we usually have with something like Stark or Circle Stark. And we need to be sumcheck based and have like this elliptic curve commitment or use IVC. So that's their argument. But now if you have delegation, well, hey, I don't need to do the proof on my memory constrained environment. I can send it out. I keep privacy, and this collaborative snark can produce a small proof.
Wow.
So yeah, whole new chapter, I think, opening up. All these works, especially the new ones I mentioned, like that just came out on ePrint, we're going to have to dig into and understand the ramifications of. But yeah, I think we could maybe point to ZK12 as like, for me, the beginning of this chapter.
Whoa, nice. I want to talk about the panel, but is there any other talks or anything you want to highlight before we move on to that?
Yeah, I also wanted to come back to the Cursive talk. So we talked about their experiment, but obviously with an experiment comes some findings. And this talk that they gave was about, obviously not the findings of the experiment on the day, but the one from ZK11 and all these other conferences. And one thing they brought to my attention is not only are mobile provers like a low memory restricted environment, it's also an environment that doesn't stay live for very long. People tap their card, they press the button of like, yeah, let's do the intersection of who I met and who you met. And then they don't want to just stay there and look at the loading bar. So they close the phone and that's it. That actually kills the computation process.
Yeah. That liveness component was mentioned. Cool.
Yeah. And it's something I had not considered at all, which is actually very important, and where delegation actually helps them. So their solution here was to say, we're not going to do MPC between these two phones because it has many rounds of communication. It takes a long time. We are going to locally encrypt using FHE, send it over to a server, and the server is going to compute over these encrypted inputs and then send data back. So you don't really need to be live for super long. You just need to be live for encryption and then live a bit longer for decryption. And yeah, I thought that was super interesting, this sort of assisted MPC kind of vibe. And kind of the same thinking of delegation, but for MPC.
That's so cool.
The other cool idea from their talk was this idea of digital pheromones. I don't know if you picked up on it too much or if you found that fun.
Well, we talked about it as well on the panel.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Digital pheromones, to explain how they've explained it, it's the idea that pheromones usually are like, chemicals in the air that cause members of the same species to act a certain way. It's usually described in the context of like mating, where animals out in the wild will have pheromones that they release that will attract members of the opposite.
Hey, it could also be stress or to alert about danger. Like
True. Okay, fair. But anyway, in this case, they talked about digital pheromones, which would be like something on your phone that as you, maybe through proximity, maybe through other means, but like let's use the example of like you walk by someone that has some sort of application on their phone and you have the application, you've like identified some interest or something, some pheromone, digital pheromone, like signal is sent between those things that you're notified to. That's the way I've understood digital pheromones. I think it's like in their talk, they were kind of covering these like categories of almost future applications for advanced cryptography. Yeah. It's not only ZK that would have to go into something like this. Maybe not even at all.
Oh, no, it's not. Yeah. They have this scheme they call Trinity, which combines like ZK, MPC, and witness encryption.
Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, I think they used it for their like recruiting experiment. They had similar ideas. And what's I found super cool, it's like, it's not even an interactive thing, is I can drop my pheromones, like drop this thing, and to most people it won't mean anything, but to some it will have meaning and they can decrypt whatever's in there and interact with it.
Yeah, and I think that's such a cool design space. And that was actually something we were exploring on the panel later on, was like, I mean, the panel, just to say what it was about, and we'll add like the link to these as they come out too, but it was meant to just talk about future ZK applications and those categories that we still wanted to define on that map of ZK, the part that had been like miscellaneous. I didn't know how to define what some of those projects did, and we wanted to sort of tease out where we might see future like projects working in the future. I think the naming will probably change over time. There'll be some sort of like tangible application or some, like something very human. Yeah. I'm thinking like ZK ID, like something we maybe already know will be the category name. But I think the concepts of digital pheromones, they also had this unbreakable consent and narrowcasting that they had mentioned in their talk that we mentioned on stage in the panel as well. It was really fun to kind of dive into those. But for going back to the digital pheromones, I think I had given on stage this example of like, it already sort of exists in a bad way with ad tech today, where, they are people like there's apps that are tracking your location and they might be tracking other people's locations. And they there are third-party applications that can do some of this matching for you. But here it would be done without that third party, ideally, that it would be done because of some cryptographic thing on your own device that's like being notified. Yeah.
It's very similar to all the contact tracing apps when COVID first broke out. So there were like very non-privacy preserving ways of doing it. And like some governments were very happy to like, yeah, sure, we'll just collect all the data, encrypt it so that only we can see it and trust us. We'll delete it after this whole thing, which obviously didn't fly super well with the cryptography community. And you had very privacy preserving ways of doing it. Of like, I'll drop something on your phone, which will be meaningless. But if a few days later, I identify myself as being COVID positive, you would receive a notification. You wouldn't know who I was or when we met.
Yeah.
You'll just know that we crossed paths within a few days.
And you might want to keep tabs on your health for a little while, see if anything happens.
Exactly. So very similar, at least at the human level, feels like a similar interaction.
That's cool. Some other topics that we covered in that panel were actually like applications that were enabled or opened up because of the concept of co-snarks. We had Ash from Tetseo on the stage. So we had, someone who's working directly on it, helping us with that category. And we also were exploring different kinds of signed data. And in prep for our conversation, I was actually watching a bit of this panel. And I realized I forgot to ask a question. So Ayush was on this panel with me, and he's the co-founder, creator of ZK Email. We started talking about signed data, which is what ZK Email is based on. Like it's based on the concept of you have signed data, therefore you can do kind of like cool cryptography with it and have some proof of its provenance. I started to ask him some questions, but I realized I focused more on like the signed data part and less on the what you can do with it.
Right.
And I realize now watching it, I'm like, oh, I wish I had asked more what you can do with it.
So that's actually the topic of the talk I gave at Web3 Summit.
Nice.
Yeah. So I can give you a quick rundown if you want.
Sure. Let's do it. And we'll find this for the listeners too. Yeah. We'll find the talk.
So once you have signed data, we pretty much always do the same thing. We give a zero knowledge proof that the data contains something of interest. So either like my name, if we're doing ZKID, or my balance, if we're doing like ZK email. I don't know, like if I get an email from my bank. So I'm going to prove that the content is somewhat interesting. I'm going to prove that it's been signed by a specific authority. So like in the case of ZK email, like whatever domain sent to the email. So it could be Venmo for like the ZK P2P stuff. Or even like for ZK login, you say I have received a sign-in token, which is actually just signed data from Google that contains my username.
Is this OAuth? Is that what you're getting?
Yeah, the OpenID stuff.
Yeah.
So ZK login and OIDC. And that's it. We always do the same thing. Prove that the data is interesting, that it's been signed by an authority of interest as well. And that's it. You can then throw that into any system and hopefully that will unlock some meaningful interaction.
Yeah, but that's the part I wanted to explore is like, what are the interactions? Like, what does that mean?
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. So not the technical, like, how do you do it?
No.
Cool.
Yeah, it was more of the like, okay, so cool. ZK email plays on the fact that like emails have some sort of standard signatures in them that you can like use. But what if you could sign more stuff?
Gotcha.
And that's what I focused on is like, how do you sign stuff instead of what does it mean if you sign stuff? Like, what could you do with it if you have it? And actually, I think Ayush did give a couple examples, but that was something, like that's just a design space that I feel that the folks over at PSE and maybe the Cursive team and probably the ZK email team and the Aptos sign-in or Aptos keyless and the SWE.
Yeah, ZK login.
Like, I feel like all those folks are thinking about those things. Yep. I'd love to do more brainstorming around that. I just love to be like, thinking about it. Maybe I'll do
all the attested microphones and like attested cameras work in the same way, right? Like, the data was signed, it's of interest, or it's been processed in an interesting way, and here's a proof.
Nice. Yeah, maybe I'll have a chance to think more about this on my time off.
Yeah.
Which is coming up after the show, actually.
There was another thing you brought up in the panel, which I thought was super interesting. This idea of like being able to leave identities behind.
Oh, yeah.
And you were saying like,
my MySpace account.
I'm really glad that my MySpace disappeared. But yeah, I think that's a big, big issue if we're going to put stuff on a like immutable ledger that lives forever, you know?
Yeah.
Like, how do we leave identities behind? How do we have this right to be forgotten? That's a big deal in like GDPR and that kind of regulation. And it got me to think that like in Web 2, this is a bug. Like MySpace no longer captured their attention. It wasn't intentional. Like it was a bug for them.
And they were sad because people had left.
Yeah.
Like the thing was dead and it was like a fail.
I mean, same with like Facebook these days is a bit dead. Like if you scroll through Facebook, there isn't much going on. But with like all this privacy tech that we're looking at, leaving identities behind becomes a feature. Because only I know that my identities are linked. And so I get to choose when I drop it or where I drop some part of it. And this framing suddenly like unlocked something for me a bit.
There was one last point that I felt we talked about, and this actually came up. You know, I don't know if you were there for this. We talked about the trust and trustlessness, the lack of institutions. And that was inspired by the podcast that you and I did, I think, or people had spoken independently to Arnaud. But like we covered that in an episode that we did, I guess like a month and a half ago or 2 months ago. For me, that has really stuck with me, that conversation. It remains like it was just the first time I had talked to anyone that was critiquing the trustless narrative, because that had been what I'd like the only thing I had really been hearing for about 7 years. Yeah. So I was kind of like, yeah, like I think the framing of trustlessness can be amazing and powerful, but pure trustlessness like comes with some things that don't actually like create healthy societies. Yeah. Even though there's this belief in like we can just make code and then we can trust code and then that should be fine. In practice, there's so many problems with that.
Yeah, I think Ash has a great line on the panel, which is like, even if you have like a PhD in cryptography, you cannot go and check all this code yourself and trust that it works.
I mean, you could try, you could audit everything, but that's like a big ask.
It's 5 lifetimes.
No one can do it all. And even if you can do some, then people have to trust you that like, because there's people who can't do it.
Yeah.
So like they're going to have to rely on someone who says, yes, this is like fine. Don't worry. There's no backdoor. It's not broken.
But yeah, to come back to your point, I think it's great that this trust infrastructure idea is growing and being thought of by people, because that will help us build useful things, you know? And yeah, I think you also quoted Arnaud on the panel saying like we need to build for aspiring bar owners rather than like stadium builders.
Yeah, I don't think that was me who brought that line up, but yeah, it was a good one.
No, I think it was Andrew from Cursive. And you can see actually in Cursive's work how these ideas of like trust infrastructure and local first come up, right?
Totally. Yeah, they had that narrow casting concept in their talk. And we mentioned it also on the panel, which was like, instead of broadcasting everywhere, it's like being able to choose small audiences, but again, not dependent on being on a chat app that's owned by somebody else. Being more like you can choose a selection of your community that you want to hear a message, but do it kind of on your own. Yeah, I really liked that panel. It's funny, this is the second time that Ayush and I have done a panel of this nature this year. So at Modular Summit during the ETHCC week in Brussels, this is, Nico, you weren't there, but we, Ayush, Tracy, and Florent and I had a panel. Sadly, it was right while Mert was speaking over on another stage at the Modular Summit. And so our stage had, I kid you not, 4 people in the audience. Wow. It was a rough one, but it was an amazing panel.
So you had 4 on stage and 4 in the audience? Yeah.
Pretty much. But it was such a good panel. We talked about applications and it was really fun. I'll try to dig that up too. Funny thing about that is the 4 people in the audience, since we've done that talk, like I've met 2 of them who've like come up specifically and been like, that was the best panel I'd ever seen. Oh, wow. So like we were really good. Okay. No one was there, but we were really good. This time we definitely had a better audience for that last talk. I was so impressed that actually people were still into it. Like we had just had a full day full of very dense content, but we had a good we had a good crowd for that last panel at the ZK Summit 12. And it felt a bit like an extension. We went in a different direction. We talked much more on the other panel about like the ZK TLS use cases and ID and stuff because of who was there. And this time, I think we went much more into this trust environments and the narrow, like the smaller communities, the bars, and less the stadiums. That's so cool. I mean, I think that sort of wraps up the review of ZK12 for me. As mentioned, we have the videos for the summit coming out over the next few weeks. So, check out the YouTube channel for the show because that's where we're going to be putting them. Before we do sign off from the show, though, I do want to just do a shout out to the sponsors of the ZK Summit. Something I think a lot of people may not realize is like the ZK Summit is not, I actually said this in my intro, but the ZK Summit is not, supported by a single network with a token, a foundation. It's not like there's some person who's just granting funds to make this happen. Every single summit is built from the ground up where we, every time we reach out to sponsors and we see who's interested, it's always a different mix. We have a lot of teams that have been repeat sponsors and come back, and we really, really appreciate it. This also allows us to keep the prices for tickets quite low. So if you do that early bird application, you get a ticket that I think is pretty reasonable for a one-day event of high quality. We also have like the student discounts that we can give out to folks who need a bit more financial support. We actually help other communities that can't pay for anything actually come to the summit as well. And this is all made possible because of these amazing sponsors that come every year. The ones that we had this year for ZK Summit 12, the top ones were Risk Zero, Irreducible, and Veradice. ZKV, one of my companies, was also a sponsor on the gold front, and they had booths. We had some silver sponsors like Fenbushi and Noma and Nil Foundation, and some wonderful community sponsors like Lagrange, ZK Verify, Snarkify, Argument, Brevis, Alio, and Fluent. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who did that for ZK12, especially right now. Given what I shared earlier, the fact that there's so much competition, there's so many other events happening in October and November. A lot of people are looking towards Bangkok and they're, trying to figure out how much budget are they going to need for that. So the teams that came through for ZK12, I just want to say a big thank you for that. I know it was a choice to work with us, and we really appreciate it. And it allows us to do these events. So yeah. For future, I think we kind of highlighted this. For the future, like if there's teams listening who want to be a sponsor of the upcoming summit, which will be happening around, I think, somewhere between March and May, somewhere in the world. We don't have a location yet. Get in touch with us anytime in the next few months, just so we have you on our radar. And also, I want to encourage sponsors, or actually just future participants, to think about those activations or those interactive points where people in this community can start to do something while on site, because it's such a great audience. And maybe we should say something about that. Like, there is a crew that we see at every summit, and it's so cool. Like, it's like a homecoming. It's like a check-in point throughout the year, to just like see some friends you hadn't seen in 6 months or so. Find out what they're working on, because, like that map of ZK described, like teams are changing and pivoting and new projects and new experiments are happening all the time. So yeah, I think it's such a cool chance to just get together with the crew. And I do feel like this, I don't know why, but ZK12 for me, so ZK11 had a magic to it for me. But I also was slightly sick and had a fever. So I was like actually finding it magical. I went home the middle of ZK Summit 11 actually to get to rest, and then came back at the end of the day. But so I was like slightly lightheaded and everything felt magical. But at ZK12, I was very healthy and it felt magical again. There was actually this moment of just like acknowledging that we were here, that this was special, that this was like something, I don't know, that meant something. I don't know. I just had this feeling. I hope I'm not getting too sentimental.
Hey, we have to. It's the last episode before the break. We're allowed to get sentimental.
Okay. But yeah, it was like, I just felt special that this was happening again, and that it was such a good feeling. The people were so happy. Everyone was really excited, but not hyperactive like the way some of those blockchain weeks are. Much more like thoughtful and creating something. So it felt great.
Yeah, it's a beautiful community.
Okay, on that note, I think that actually wraps up what I wanted to chat about with the ZK Summit 12, but also all of these events that happened this year. As listeners know, I think I might even mention this in the intro, but as listeners know, I am taking a break starting after this episode. I have said no weekly shows until the end of the year, but I already have a sense that there's a very high likelihood that there's going to be an episode in November, and there might be one in December. But I am really trying to take this time off to also spend time thinking about all of this stuff. Like that panel to me is like, I mean, I've had these 2 panels this year, 3 panels actually, with you and Jim at Web3 Summit, with Ayush, Tracy, and Florent, and 4 people in the audience at Modular Summit, and the one that I had at ZK12. And I feel like all of these, I mean, they're all exploring these sort of edges of ZK, and I really like that place. That's what I want to spend my time reading up on over the break.
So can I ask you, like, what's next, or are you still going to be lurking behind the scenes while you're on a break?
So on the podcast front, like, we're going to be releasing a new version of the website. The current website, I don't think really reflects what we're doing anymore, and it was built in 2020, so it's definitely due for a refresh. We're thinking about maybe like modifying or like tweaking the intro music. Maybe. Ooh. We have done that once before, by the way. Like, if you go back to a very early episode, it's a slightly different jingle. Same general vibe. Yeah. Created by Henrik, our wonderful editor. But yeah, we're thinking of like playing with that. I'm also thinking about like the format for the show, because the thing I love about the show is the ability to explore all of these like new topics and things that kind of go beyond what I'm working on too, like with other projects. But the thing that I find maybe like tricky is that it's also kind of constrained with this weekly format to come out every week. It means like there's always a production schedule. And so I'm just going to spend some time thinking about that format. It's not to say it's changing. It's just that I'm like, is there another way to do it? So I'm going to think about that. And then, I mean, I have 2 other companies that I'm running at the same time. Yes. So I'm not really taking vacation. We have ZKV, and we have a team over there of like 9. I think we're going to be maybe hiring someone new this year. So, you know, there's a lot of activity happening over there. And then on the ZK Hack front, we have also grown our team this year. There's going to be, at the end of the year, the ZK Hack online multi-week workshops and CTF puzzle hacking competition. And I think most relevant to this audience, over the next few months, we're going to be releasing every 2 weeks the ZK Whiteboard Sessions, the thing we mentioned early on. So we've just, as mentioned, wrapped up the 6th module literally two days ago. And we're going to be doing the edits, and we're going to be releasing them every 2 weeks. There's already one out with Nico and David doing a presentation on what is ZK like actually. I loved how that turned out. I don't know. Did you get a chance to watch it?
No, not entirely.
Okay.
But I'm just happy that we put that content out there. Yeah.
It's really good. I thought it was a great start to this season. So yeah, I'll definitely be making some noise about that. I will also be, I think I'm like at least like half leading the study group on this. Yeah. I think I've signed myself up to do that. So cool. I'll be over on the ZK. Yeah, I'll be on the ZK Hack Discord being quite active. I'm actually going to be doing the study group myself. So like I'm going to be a student of it at the very least, but I might also help coordinate a little bit. And that should keep me occupied until the end of the year.
Yeah.
But I really
like a very ZK holiday.
But I'm not going to DevCon, and that's the win, right? By saying no to that, I say no to everything. So yeah, there's no other travel, like no one's trying to go, or as far as I know, there's no other like major event this quarter. And so by saying no to it, I feel like I've just given myself like a bit of a pass on travel, which is cool. But yeah, Nico, I think that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks so much for doing this with me.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing me on as a co-host so often. Wanted to point out a nice little circular thing, which is first time I was on the show was after ZK9 in Lisbon.
Amazing.
And so now here I am again after ZK12 in Lisbon, wrapping up before the break.
Very cool. All right. I want to say thank you to the podcast team, Henrik, Rachel, Tanya, and Jonas, and to our listeners. Thanks for listening.